Yeah, so today's topic is introduction to alternative fuels. Okay, so we've already seen some of it in the previous lectures. Okay, so what are alternative fuels? The three generations of biofuels, the need for alternative fuels or biofuels. Then we'll talk about electric vehicles, the pros and cons, and then the biofuel policies in India. The other side of 1G ethanol, we discussed about the food versus fuel debate, and then the the carbon emissions, everything, and then we'll have the Q&A. So okay, so let's go ahead. So what are alternative fuels? So fuels that other than fossil fuels like petroleum and natural gas that are derived from plant and animal matter. In some cases, it can also be hydrogen produced through electrolysis. That the electricity for the electrolysis comes from renewable energy. So you have solar and wind power plants that produce the electricity required for the electrolyzer, and then that produces green hydrogen. All right, so that can also be considered as alternative fuel, although hydrogen is not being used as an automotive fuel currently. It is being used for, let's say, steel production, oil refining, and so on. Okay, and a few other uh, like a few other uses actually. Okay, so some examples of biofuels or alternative fuels are, bioethanol, biomethanol. So how do you produce bioethanol? Anyone?
What, sir?
How do you produce bioethanol?
Biochemical process.
Yeah, so how does that work?
Fermentation.
Fermentation of starch.
Yeah, exactly. So
Fermentation of
you have,
biomass.
yeah, fermentation of it could be 1G also, that is fermentation of crops, or
Yes.
fermentation of crop residues like straws, husks, and all that. Okay. Then you have biomethanol. Can you tell me how to produce biomethanol?
Anaerobic decomposition of
No, that's methane. That's not methanol.
okay, methanol.
Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you this. So you have thermochemical process. You produce syngas that is rich in hydrogen, and then you kind of adjust the composition of the syngas to have like 2:1 ratio without a lot of carbon dioxide. So you have to have hydrogen and carbon monoxide in a 2:1 ratio. Okay, but there should be very less carbon dioxide, which is about 5% only, not more than that. Syngas that you get normally has about 30% carbon dioxide, so you have to remove the carbon dioxide first. Okay, and you do that through a pressure swing adsorption or vacuum pressure swing adsorption unit. Okay. It can also be done chemically. This is a physical adsorption based gas separation. You can also do it chemically using some amines and all that. Okay. But yeah, basically that is it. Biodiesel and bio CNG hydrogen. All of these, how can they be produced? Any idea? So let's start with biodiesel.
Biochemical process.
Biodiesel. Yeah, I mean, you explain what the process is.
Don't know, sir.
It's not
From
biochemical. It's
biofuel,
sorry.
biofuel, the esterification, biofuel.
Yes, esterification is the last process in that. But what do you, I mean, what is the material or the reactant for the esterification process? What
I'm
do you
not
need
sure.
to produce? What do you need to produce first before doing the esterification?
Um, I'm not sure.
Okay, we saw this yesterday, bio oils, right? So through pyrolysis, you produce bio oils and then you esterify them. Another way to do this is you have used cooking oil. Okay. So the oils that you use in your kitchen and in restaurants and all they use, right? So once it's used, I think once or twice, it loses its properties. So we can collect all that oil and then we can do some trans esterification process to produce biodiesel. Okay. Then how is bio CNG? What is CNG?
Compressed natural gas.
Yes. Now tell me how is bio CNG produced?
From syngas.
Yeah. From syngas. How do you
Syngas
produce
or
how do you produce bio CNG from syngas?
is it syngas or producer gas?
No, that has nothing to do with syngas or producer gas. This is produced through anaerobic digestion, right? You produce methane. What is
Okay.
natural gas? It's just methane, right?
Okay.
Mostly
Bio
it's methane,
CNG is methane.
right?
Okay.
And then you also have to separate out the carbon dioxide to obtain pure methane.
Sweetening of the gas.
Sweetening is different. Sweetening is, you remove the impurities like H2S and all that.
Okay.
Okay, acid gas removal, that is sweetening. Then hydrogen, how can hydrogen be produced? From biomass.
Yeah, it is obtained from syngas.
Yes. So syngas is very rich in hydrogen. So you can separate out the other gases to obtain hydrogen. That is also done through a PSA, pressure swing adsorption unit. So where you have some zeolites that are there in a column, and then you pressurize the entire column. So because of the pressure, these zeolites are very porous. Like I said, I showed you this thing, right? Charcoal, biochar. Similar to that, all these zeolites are very porous, and then each type of zeolite has an affinity to a certain gas. Okay, so in the case of hydrogen, the other three gases can be, hydrogen can be captured by these zeolites, and then the other three gases come out. And then when you depressurize it, you release the hydrogen from the pores and you get pure hydrogen. So normally you will have like 70% recovery rate. So if you give 100 grams of hydrogen, you'll get back only 70 grams. The other 30 grams won't be adsorbed. And it will go on with the other gases. But the other gases are also combustible because, it contains CO and CH4 also, right? It has a large amount of CO2, of course, but then it has CO and CH4 and part of hydrogen also. So you can use that for the interior processes. Like if you want to produce steam, you need to produce steam first, right? For the syngas. So you can use it for that. You can even burn it to produce electricity. Use it in an engine or something. Okay. So that can be done. So these are basically the alternative fuels. So the difference between biofuels and alternative fuels is just this, that if it is produced from biomass, it is biofuels. That's it. In this case, in the case of electrolyzer, I cannot call it biofuel, right? There is no bio here. So I'm just splitting water. That's it. Okay. So yeah. So we have seen this. There are three generations of biofuels. One is the first generation, which is produced from crops such as sugarcane, corn, and so on. Second generation produced from lignocellulosic biomass, like the straws, the crop residues, and the third generation is production of biofuels from algae, which is still under research right now. So 2G is just becoming commercial. 1G is already commercial since I think 50 years now, 50, 60 years now. Yeah. There are two types of residues. One is primary residue and the other is secondary residue. What are primary residues? The residues that you get directly after harvest on the field itself. Like for example, you have stalks, and straws. Okay, you get it without further any processing that happens. You after harvesting the crop. So let's say you have a maize field, you harvest the crop. Whatever is standing is called corn stover or corn stalk, right? You can just cut that and that's your biomass basically, right? Secondary residues are obtained during processing, further processing of the crop. For example, you have rice husk, where the husk is separated from the grain, right? And then you have bagasse, sugarcane bagasse, where you crush the sugarcane, whatever is remaining after removing the juice, that is bagasse. Okay. And advanced biofuels are just fuels derived from this type of biomass. So sometimes, I mean, second generation biofuels are also called, or anything that is not first generation, so 2G and 3G are also called advanced biofuels. Okay. So sometimes even, the municipal solid waste, whatever fuels you produce from municipal solid waste, that is also known as advanced biofuels, because you're not using anything of value, right? You're just producing energy from waste. So that is the basic idea behind this. So why biofuels or why alternative fuels? So if you look at the transportation final energy consumption, so in India's final energy consumption in 2018 was 600 million tons of oil equivalent. So I told you about this unit, million tons of oil equivalent. I think in the first or second lecture, does someone remember this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Whatever energy is consumed is
yeah.
compared to the amount of fuel that the what is it?
Amount of
Fuel used, fossil fuel
what
used,
fuel? What fuel?
petrol,
It's
no,
there right in the name itself.
fossil fuel,
What is the name of that unit?
crude oil,
In
million
unit.
metric
Yeah.
tons of
Million tons of
million tons of energy. No, not energy.
million tons of
What is
dash
it?
equivalent.
Okay.
What does it O stand for?
Oil.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay,
it is
million tons of
compared to
oil equivalent.
yeah. So it is compared to oil. So it's just a convention, as in it's kind of like a normalization. So it doesn't matter if you consume coal, natural gas, or oil, or any other form of energy, except if it is renewable, obviously. So if you're consuming any type of fossil fuel, then that is converted into million tons of oil equivalent. Okay. So it's just matching the energy levels. That's it. So if you, let's say if you've consumed 10 megajoules, so what is that in oil equivalent? So that's how it is. Okay. Let me just tell you this. What is so? One second. Okay. So 1 million ton of oil equivalent is equal to 42 petajoules. Petajoules is 10 to the power of 16. Oh, sorry, not 16. Right. So it's 4.2 into 10 to the power 16 joules. That's what a petajoule is. Okay. So that's how much it is. Anyway, and imagine 600 million tons of oil equivalent. So that's a lot. And out of that, 17% was contributed from the transport sector. In that, 97% came from fossil fuels, and only 1% came from renewables. Okay. And the transport emissions in India, the emissions due to transport is this was in 2018. So now it would be much higher actually. Uh, zero point 0.3 gigatons, which is the third largest after USA and China. So something needs to be done about that, right? And the other perspective. So one is the perspective of the environment. So there is the carbon emission, and there is In general, so much of consumption we have consumption of oil and natural gas and other forms of fossil fuels. The other perspective here is the import, because India is a net importer of oil products, right? So in 21, 22, we imported about 211 million tons of crude oil. Okay. And petrol, out of which, I mean, the consumption of petrol was about 30 million tons, and and this is expected to rise to 35 million tons in 2025. And the diesel consumption was about 76 million tons. So biofuels are required not only for the environment, it is also required to ensure that our foreign reserves do not deplete. So if we produce biofuels and then we blend them with the fossil fuels and then we run that, right? So we are importing that much less fuels, right? So that will help our economy also. Although the government has to spend in other ways, like because biofuels are expensive compared to fossil fuels. So in terms of, let's say, subsidies or incentives, something like that. But the money stays within India. That is the advantage. So if some subsidies are given to the farmers, let's say, or to the companies purchasing the biomass, and the biomass is available for cheap, then what happens? We have cheap biofuel, right? And although the taxpayers are still paying for this, instead of paying premium to import crude oil, we could simply pay the farmers and then ensure that local jobs are created. So that is the advantage of biofuels. We have seen this. Can someone explain this?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is um, the graph showing
Mhm.
like if currently we are going with RCP 8.5,
Right.
um, mm, where we have a high amount of coal consumption, and
Right.
if this continues, the temperature rise will be within to 2100. The temperature rise will be in between 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, and
Yes.
our goal is to come to RCP 2.6,
Yeah. What is
which
RCP
will
2.6?
RCP 2.6 is where we reduce the coal consumption and increase biomass consumption.
Yes, exactly. So RCP 2.6. And what does this 2.6, 8.5 mean?
That is the amount of energy trapped in the atmosphere. Whatever the solar energy, the sunlight comes up, and
Yeah.
yes, the
It's
energy
just the
trapped.
heating up of the planet. That's it.
Yes,
The unit is watt per meter squared. Okay, and it's called radiative forcing.
radiative forcing.
Okay.
Yes,
So, like he explained, so you have this was the actual consumption in the year 2000, and you can see more consumption of oil than coal, and then a little bit of bioenergy as well. And there are four different scenarios worked out by the IPCC. Okay. That if we travel in these pathways, what will the result be? So if you see RCP 8.5, which is business as usual. So if we are continuing with this kind of, in this pathway, we'll be very reliant on coal in the next 80 years. Okay, 75 years, and very little reliance on the other sources of energy. So that will lead to a lot of carbon emissions, and because of that, the temperature rise of the Earth's atmosphere will be between 4 and 5 degrees Celsius from industrial revolution, which is catastrophic. Okay. Our target is between less than 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, for which this is the target, RCP 2.6. So what happens here is you limit the use of coal, and then you increase the use of bioenergy and other sources, like I think this is hydro. No, this is natural gas. Hydro is a little bit, and you have to limit oil as well, right? So essentially, you're replacing this oil by biofuels, right, or bioenergy. So that's where you can have most contribution from bioenergy. Okay. So, and another interesting thing that we can see, yeah,
Sururdi.
you mute yourself, please. I'll just mute it. Okay. Yeah. So another interesting thing that we can see here is the life cycle greenhouse gas emission for vehicles in India. This is a report published in 2021. If you see the petrol, diesel, and CNG, so this is the range like 213 to 272 grams per gram CO2 per kilometer. And for CNG, it is for diesel it is quite high. CNG it is slightly lower. Okay, but most of this comes from the fuel consumption, as in the tailpipe emission. So when the fuel get burnt in the tank, right, and then in the engine, so that's where most of the emissions come from. So around two-thirds of the emissions come from this. And if you see the others, fuel production, manufacture, and maintenance, they are a little low. So this is a good opportunity for us to reduce this carbon emissions. So how can we reduce this? So CO2 emissions from fuel consumption.
By making use of biomass.
How?
Like increasing the use of biomass as fuel than petrol
Mhm.
and diesel.
Yeah, but how is that reducing carbon emissions from fuel? I mean, from burning the fuel.
Because biomass is whatever carbon dioxide was there in the atmosphere, it's getting
Mhm.
converted to biomass, and that is being used by us. So we are just putting back whatever carbon dioxide was collected in a
Right,
cycle.
right. So it is carbon neutral.
Yes,
Okay. So because of
yes.
that, if we start using biofuels in our vehicles instead of fossil fuels, or at least a blend, so we can reduce this 65%, or whatever the absolute number is, we can reduce that. Okay. But of course, there will be some emissions during fuel production. So what are the emissions during fuel production? Biofuel, I'm asking. Where are these emissions coming from? So let's consider this for biofuels. So I say that, okay, this can be reduced. The fuel consumption emissions can be reduced. There are some emissions with respect to fuel production also. So where is that coming from?
It is coming during the production of biofuels. For
How?
example,
Yeah.
um, mm, for pyrolysis and all, we need an external source of energy in order to heat them up.
You can still use biomass there. You
Okay.
can have a gasification plant there to produce producer gas, or a biogas plant to produce biogas, and you can heat. I mean, you can use that for the heating.
Okay.
This that option is there, no?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. There are two major sources of carbon emissions in the biofuel value chain. What are those? So think from the beginning to the end. You have to think in terms of the life cycle. So where it starts and where it ends.
When it comes to paddy, it starts in
Yeah.
the field itself. Methane is
Yeah.
a
Most
lot of
biomass
methane.
start in the field, right? Any and all
Yes.
biomass, at least I mean the crop biomass.
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens there?
Methane is released when
Right.
uh, when we fill the paddy field with water, a layer
Yeah.
of
Okay.
yes.
I mean, because of the anaerobic nature of, because of the flooding, there is anaerobic condition within the water, and that releases methane. Okay. So what about, I mean, what other sources of, greenhouse gas emissions are there during agriculture?
One is transportation. Does transportation include the?
Transportation, yeah, I'll come to that. You're absolutely right, but I'm asking about agriculture itself.
Okay.
So you told about CH4. CH4 is there mostly only in paddy. So
Paddy,
there's no
yes.
paddy cultivation. So there's no methane emission in other crops like millets and all that because there's no flooding.
Yes,
So
but there
wherever
is
there's
a release
flooding,
of nitrogenous compounds
yeah, it's N2O, nitrous oxide.
into. Okay.
Okay, why is it released?
It is released because of improper fertilization to the soil.
Yeah, it's not improper fertilization. Normally, we have
Over.
more, high amount of fertilizers, and because of that, whatever the plant must take, it will take. But then the remaining, whatever is remaining, right, it will get oxidized because of the bacteria within the soil.
Soil.
Okay,
Yes.
so N2O is produced. N2O is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide in terms of greenhouse effect. Okay. So that is one thing. There's one more thing called land use change. So where if we have forests, if we have forest land which has stored carbon, right? Forest lands have stored carbon within the soil surface. If we clear the forest and change that into whatever else it is, like let's say even agriculture or something, then what happens is that all the stored carbon gets oxidized because again, because of respiration by the bacteria within the soil, and some soil carbon is released. So that is land use change carbon emissions, and that is quite huge. And that is the reason we should never, I mean, we can go for already existing agricultural lands, never clear forest and then, make an agricultural land for this purpose. Okay. So biofuel policy efforts in India. So here we started around 2003. Okay, so in 2003 there was a 1G ethanol blending program that was introduced. Okay, and then we had a national biodiesel mission during that time also, during that time itself. But and then again, there was notification for procurement of ethanol again, and then more notifications. And then we had the national policy on biofuels in 2009. But until 2012, we never had enough. We never had enough uh, impetus to produce the biofuels or produce the ethanol required. So in 2012, from 2012 onwards, the ethanol blending has been on an upward trend, except for maybe a couple of years in between. But yeah, from 0.67%, we reached 10% in 2022. So what happened in this case in during this time? So we had some targeted government interventions. Okay, targeted government interventions like administered price mechanism. What is administered price mechanism? Let's say you are producing ethanol, but then you are producing, let's say you are producing ethanol and I'm producing ethanol, but we're using two different, raw materials. Okay. You are using molasses, I'm using sugarcane juice. Sugarcane juice is, it's easy to convert to ethanol because of the high sugar content. Molasses, not so much. Molasses, of course, there is sugar, but then it's slightly lesser, especially C molasses, if I'm not mistaken. So there are two types, B and C molasses. Then then what happens is you incur more cost to produce the same amount of ethanol than me. So the government says, okay, since you have incurred more cost, I will provide you more. I'll purchase the ethanol from you for more amount. So that is administered price mechanism, or we can also call it differential pricing. Okay, so this is a policy that the government has been following for the last decade or so. Okay, and that has kind of helped catapult the bioethanol production, the blending of bioethanol from 0.67% to 10%. Okay. A lot of vehicles are there, a lot of vehicles that are compatible with the E10, E15, E20 also. We are targeting E20 by 2025. Okay. So in between, we also had the national policy on biofuels in 2018, and then the ethanol blending program in 2020, and for the and then we have a green hydrogen policy which was recently introduced in 2022. So I think it is 5 million ton target from electrolysis based. I mean solar and wind electrolysis based hydrogen production by 2030. There is also a biodiesel policy from used cooking oil. Okay, over here, and the target is 5% biodiesel by the year 2030. But there is no update on that. We know for sure that we have reached 10% in terms of bioethanol, but biodiesel is not. It's not very clear as to what we have done in biodiesel so far. So in the national policy on biofuels, there was one sentence where they had mentioned that the biomethanol and biohydrogen will be considered as advanced biofuels, and a lot of um, incentives will be offered. I mean, that was just mentioned. I'm not sure if anything has happened in that regard. Then we had this green hydrogen policy where we are producing hydrogen through electrolysis. So that was kind of dropped, I think. But then if we can actually go back to the biohydrogen policy, if we can produce biohydrogen, that will be very useful for the economy and also the the local jobs and everything. So what is the other side of 1G ethanol? So we have spoken about this, the food versus fuel debate. Okay. So the 1G ethanol blending started in the 1970s because of the oil crisis, and it started in Brazil and the USA. So Brazil used sugarcane, and USA has a huge production of maize. So they both started producing ethanol. So they were from these crops, and there was a lot of controversy because of this, because they're using perfectly good crops for ethanol production instead of using it to feed the people. Brazil, especially, which was not very economically sound at that time, right? So in India also, we have achieved 10%, but most of this is from sugarcane molasses, sugarcane juice, corn, damaged grains, and surplus grains and stock with the Food Corporation of India. So now this is an issue. So the Food Corporation of India has surplus grains. They are allowing the ethanol producers to use that grain which they've kept in stock. Maybe we don't need it for the foreseeable future, but then, of course, in a country like us, there's no telling when we'll need excess grains, right? So that is something. And even recently, what happened just about 6 months ago, uh, because of using sugarcane for ethanol production, the prices of sugar I mean, there was a shortage of sugar, and the prices of sugar kind of went up. Okay. So the government said, okay, now we'll stop focusing on ethanol. We'll go back to sugar production and then come back to ethanol when that is stable. Okay, it's kind of like a monkey balancing, but then the issue is that if the industry will do whatever is useful for, I mean, whatever is profitable for them, right? So if I have a sugar mill and I say, okay, I can get more profit out of making ethanol than sugar, I'll make ethanol, and that is where the issue is. And because of offtake guarantees, if I produce ethanol, the government will purchase it from me. So I'm sure that okay, I'll get the value for my investment. Okay, value for my product. So I will go for ethanol. So because of this, there have been some issues with sugar production and everything. Okay. So this is a quote from Neeraj Gowal. So if necessity is the mother of invention, urgency is the uncle of change. Without it, progress slows, then stops, then reverses. It's just a quote that I found amusing actually. So
Yes, because
yeah,
necessity, when we say is most of the inventions to date is because of the World War, right?
right.
Kind
Yeah,
of.
of course, of course. So even gasification, if you look at the history of gasification, right?
Okay.
Wood gasification was carried out in during World War II. So there
Okay.
were cars that were running with producer gas during that time.
Mhm.
And there was this Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, that process. It was commercialized in South Africa. So South Africa had this apartheid, right? And then they were heavily under sanction from the rest of the world. So in fact, they could not even purchase crude oil or anything. So how did they manage their energy supplies? So they have a huge deposit of coal, right? So there's this process called FT synthesis where coal or biomass can be converted into, I mean, first gasify it, and then this gas can be converted into petrol and diesel. That's how they were surviving for so long before the end of apartheid, that is, you know. So all of these things happen. In fact, during World War II, there were so many inventions that were, I mean, even in terms of energy, I'm not talking only about the war effort and weapons and all, even in terms of energy. In fact, one of the side effects of the nuclear program, the nuclear bomb, was nuclear energy, right? So something good that came out of something so sinister. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Yeah. So electric vehicles. So we have spoken about this. So are electric vehicles really sustainable? So by 2040, EVs will make up a sizable chunk of all cars on the road. But are there any benefits? So there are two benefits. One is reduced dependence on petroleum, and zero tailpipe emissions. So, like I said a few days ago, there are these buses in Bangalore. The new fleet of EV BMTC has, uh, purchased a new fleet of electric vehicles, and in the on that bus, it's written "Let the city breathe." Okay, that is true to some extent. Yeah, the city will breathe, but then where is the electricity coming from that you use to charge your bus, right? Charge the battery of your bus. So that comes from obviously that comes from coal, most of it. Okay, because I mean, as we have seen before, 80% of our electricity comes from coal. Okay, so the other cons are, lithium reserves are found only in a handful of countries. So you have these countries like Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, USA, Australia, and China. So instead of depending on the Middle East or let's say Russia, for example, we'll be depending on all these countries. So our previous president, Mr. Ramnath Kovind, he had gone to, if I'm not mistaken, Peru or Bolivia, one of these two countries, to strike a deal, for the supply of lithium. Okay, this was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, so we'll still be depending on
So
imports because
recently,
huh?
so recently there was news that in Ladakh they have found new mines for
Yeah,
lithium or
there
something.
is. Yeah, but how much is that? So they have found in Karnataka also.
Oh,
I think 2 years back there was news that they've found some reserves in Karnataka also. So it's not as much as China or Bolivia. Okay,
okay, okay, okay.
we can just use it. Of course, we can mine it and use it, but then how much is that? That's the big question, right? So the other cons are, the generation of e-waste from the batteries. So every 3 4 years you have to change your batteries. Okay, that leads to higher costs first of all, and second is the e-waste. Okay, the charging infrastructure, of course, this can be changed, but currently it's not very widespread. So if you want to purchase an electric vehicle, you ensure that you have charging in both your, at both your home and office or college or wherever. That's very important, right? Although, yeah, because of all these scooters coming up, right? Ola and Ether and all of these coming up, we are having a surge of charging infrastructure. That is good. Okay. So the life cycle GHG emission of EVs are about 150 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometer. We have seen previously for petrol, diesel, and CNG. Of course, this is lower. This is lower. No doubt about it. No question about it. But then, yeah, it's not exactly 100% green, is what I'm saying. Okay. So I think petrol and diesel were about 200 to 300 grams, right? We saw in a few slides ago. This one is 150. So that is good. Okay. And yeah, so if everyone goes towards EV, then the load on the power grid will be enormous. Okay. And whether the grid will be able to handle this surge is subject to debate. Okay. The infrastructure required, the electrical infrastructure required will be too high. Okay, because you're just adding more load to the electricity grid. Okay. So we'll come to the questions, but before that, if you have any doubts. Any questions on today's lecture or any other lecture?
No, sir.
Okay. So let's go on to the questions. So what does the 8.5 and RCP 8.5 stand for?
Radiative forcing.
Yeah, that is correct. That is just the amount of heat.
Amount of energy absorbed by the atmosphere.
Yeah, yeah. So
Watt per
amount
meter
of heat
square.
trapped by the atmosphere. Okay, that increases the temperature of the atmosphere, right?
Yes.
Which of the following statements are true? You can check the statements and then
All of them, sir.
how?
Second generation biofuels are produced using non-food agricultural residue.
Right,
Yes. And then second generation biofuels are also called as advanced biofuels.
right,
That is correct. And first generation biofuels are directly produced from crops like sugarcane or corn.
right. Yeah, so all of the above, right?
Yes.
Then you have which among these biomass to biofuel conversion pathways comes under thermochemical conversion?
Pyrolysis, sir.
Yeah, so it's what is pyrolysis?
Pyrolysis is the um, no oxygen burning of heating of biomass to
Yeah,
extract
yeah,
volatile gases and biochar.
yeah. And what else?
And
Volatile gases and biochar is okay. What else you're missing? One major product.
yes, syngas, syngas, gas.
No. Solid, liquid, and gas. Remember that. Yes. Oil.
Yes.
Bio oil.
Okay. Oil. Bio oil. Yes. Bio oils.
Right. So bio
Yes.
oil cannot be used directly. It has to be esterified to produce biodiesel. Okay.
Biodiesel.
So pyrolysis is the thermochemical pathway.
So bio
Next.
oil is like the crude oil for
Yeah, but
petrol,
it's
right?
different from crude oil. Like yesterday, we saw the properties, right? It is more viscous, if I'm not mistaken, and then it has oxygen, whereas crude oil does not have oxygen. Okay,
Okay.
so it is kind of volatile. It just reacts easily with other components. Okay, other
Yes.
compounds too. It volatilizes easily. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that it's safely stored first of all, and then we have to convert it into biofuel or biodiesel as quickly as possible. Okay.
Yes.
So the Indian government allowed the use of multiple feedstocks and introduced differential pricing to ensure the development of ethanol industry in India. What is meant by differential pricing?
So option B.
Are you sure?
Like they are giving the biomass to the companies at a lower price, right?
No, that's not what they are doing.
Okay.
They are doing that with only the FCI. So even the FCI grain rate, they are giving it at I think 2,000 rupees per quintal or something, which is 20
Okay.
rupees per kg, which is not very cheap.
Okay.
So what did the Indian government do to ensure uh, fairness basically in production of ethanol? So I told you the example of the two of us having different
Molasses and sugarcane.
yes.
So in that case, it will be option A, I guess. But
Yes.
it
So
cannot
it
be
is.
C because
Mhm.
whatever ethanol is produced is blended into the fuels.
Yeah. So it is A
So it's
because
option A.
so government is purchasing the ethanol at different prices from different types of plants. So if you produce from molasses, if you
Yes.
produce from sugarcane juice, if you produce from maize, it's all different. Okay, because you all incur different costs. Okay, it's not the same cost. So you cannot just procure it at the same rate. Okay, which leads to difference in profitability. Okay, this is to ensure equity. That's it, and to ensure that more and more feedstocks are used for ethanol conversion. So why is biomass considered a carbon neutral source of energy? We've seen this, but you can just
Yes.
yeah.
Option C, sir.
Yeah, CO2 emitted during combustion of biomass is the same amount of CO2 absorbed by the plant during its life using photosynthesis and hence does not add any new CO2 to the atmosphere. So it is called carbon neutral because of this. So whatever CO2 it
Yes.
absorbs is what it releases. So electric vehicles have no tailpipe emissions. However, these vehicles also contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. How?
Sir, option A and B.
Yeah, so which is D,
D.
right? I've given you. So manufacturing of the EV itself will contribute to emissions because of the use of electricity and other resources, other fuels. And then the electricity itself comes from coal in many countries. In India, it's about 80% of the electricity comes from coal. So using grid
Yes.
power to charge the electric vehicles contributes to the global warming. You know,
Yes.
and why is the sustainability of first generation bioethanol under debate despite its potential to reduce the need for fossil fuels?
All of the above, sir.
Yeah. Can you justify your answer?
Yes, sir. Just like you said, during biofuel production, there is a
Hmm.
lot of complication. For example, the nitrous oxide released and the
Right.
methane released in paddy fields.
Yeah.
So that is something. And the food fuel debate, which is going on for 50 years, the second.
Right. Right.
Yes, instead of which will create a food shortage. And also,
Mhm.
the vehicle parts are not yet compatible with the higher percentage of ethanol in fuel.
Yeah. Absolutely true. So if you want to go for E20 or higher versions of ethanol blended petrol, then you need to ensure that your engine and your the parts in
Like
the
the
engine.
Bharat stage.
No, Bharat stage is different. Bharat stage is different, but the engines should be compatible with ethanol.
Oh,
See, because it
yes.
contains oxygen. Ethanol contains oxygen, right?
Yes.
Whereas petrol and diesel do not contain oxygen. So it is volatile. So we need to ensure that it is compatible with, that high percentage of ethanol. So in fact, in Sweden, I think 10 years ago, there were some issues with corrosion within the tank. Okay. So 10, 12 years ago, what happened is they went for higher blends of ethanol, but then the tanks were not built for that percentage of ethanol, and they were corroded. And since then, the Swedes have been very apprehensive of ethanol-based vehicle, biofuel-based vehicle. So that is kind of detrimental, right? So if you want to promote something, you need to ensure that there is safety of operation, and right. So that's very important. Okay. So ethanol blending program envisages a 20% blend. Okay. The estimated consumption of petrol in the year is 3.5 crore tons. Calculate the amount of ethanol needed to be produced in 2025 to satisfy this demand. So I've given you the density of petrol. Okay. So this 20% is on volume basis. Okay. The 20% blend is on volume basis. So if you have 1 liter of the blended petrol, right, you will have 20.2 liters of ethanol and 0.8 liters of petrol. So that's how it is. Now tell me.
Sir, 875 crore liters.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Because you need 3.5 crore tons, which you convert it
Yes.
into volume. What is how much volume of petrol is that?
Just a minute. It is 43. What is it? The volume.
Yeah, volume. I mean, I've given it
Okay.
given in tons, right? So I need the
4375. 4375,000.
yeah. So that's in what units?
It's in meter cube liters.
Yeah, meter cube. And then you take 20% of that, not 20%, as in. So wait 1 second. 3.5 crore tons, right? 10 to the power of 7 percent. 3.5 and kgs by kg per meter. This much meter cube, right?
Yes. Yes. 20% of it is 875 crore liters.
Yeah, meter cube, so 1,000. Yeah, 8.75. Sorry, 875 crore liters, right?
Yes. Yes.
It is very simple. You just convert it into volume and then use the 20% blend. That's it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's it for today. We finished exactly on time. So that's another record for today.